Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Sustainable Design Week 2018 Crisis as Opportunity. And welcome to the Department of Architecture and Design of the Maroun Sem'an Faculty of Engineering and Architecture at the AUB. I want to particularly welcome our guests who came from abroad and thank them for agreeing to take time out of their busy schedules to be with us in Beirut for these 3 days. Let me introduce myself to them, actually. My name is Muna Harib. I'm the chairperson of the Department of Architecture and Design. So we're very happy to host you with us. We're going to hear presentations and discussions by Kilian Kleinschmidt. Where is he? I saw you earlier. So Mr. Kleinschmidt is currently a consultant at the Austrian Ministry of Internal Affairs, and he's better known for his role in managing the infamous Atari camp in Jordan. Melanie Fessel. Hello, Melanie. Melanie is architect and urban designer at One, a very interesting applied ecological research enterprise, and she's also a lecturer at the ETH Zurich. Nora Jumblat will be with us tomorrow. You all know her being the patron of the Beit Eddin Arts Festival and Gallery 5070 in Lebanon. She's also the founder and chair of the Kayani Foundation, which brings education to Syrian refugees in cooperation with AUB and the Ministry of Social Affairs. We also have with us Hugh Bosley, founder and chair of Reboot Camp, a career accelerator that operates in Jordan and that works with the Syrian refugees as well as Jordanian students. And we also have Albert Company Olmo, an engineer from Barcelona who has been working very far away from Barcelona in Thailand and Myanmar through his firm Agora Architects, which advances responsible design, and he's now stationed in Yangon. Correct? Yes. We're also very excited to hear our own AUB colleagues, Mona Fawaz, Hana Al-Ghali, who's not with us, I think, Sara Rita Kattan, saw her, yes, and Salma Samar Damlouji, and Aram Yeredzian, who will be discussing and moderating the sessions and will enrich the discussion with their insights. So the Sustainable Design Week this year is curated by Karim Najjar. You all know him, Associate Professor of Architecture. So I want to thank him for taking up the organization of this very important event to the department. I particularly value how the Sustainable Design Week links with existing coursework and studios, which really allows the conversation to continue throughout the semester and even beyond. Karim is an associate professor at the department here and also the co-founder of Najjar Architects, an international practice with wide recognition. He's also the founder of the Design Impact Lab, the D-Lab at AUB, where you see the work posted outside in the lobby, and he will tell you more about it in his talk tomorrow, after tomorrow. So Karim was also the coordinator of the architecture program here for several years. Finally, I want to thank the donors who made this event possible, the Areen Lectures Funds at the department, which make this event possible, as well as other prominent lectures, GIZ via the EU Madad and the German Corporation. And I'll end just by noting that this is the closing event that marks the 50th anniversary of the architecture program at AUB, so we're very proud of featuring this Sustainable Design Week as well in the series of events that we did throughout 2018. So without further ado, I will leave the floor to Karim. I invite you to read more details about everyone in the very nice booklet you have here that has been designed by our own Karim Farah. I thank you all for coming, and I wish everyone inspiring talks and debates over the next 3 days. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Muna, and also thank you for supporting the event as chair of the department. I also want to extend the thanks to Sara Rita Kattan, who worked on organizing this event. Thank you. Salma, for your support also, like organizing, and it was very helpful in finding all and soliciting all these wonderful guests that we have now. And Karim Farah already mentioned for the beautiful design work, and of course Serene, Siwar, and Rabia, who are here. So do we have a, how do we click? Okay. So the event is kind of the title, Crisis as Opportunity, and everybody can imagine like that crises are opportunities, or that we know that crises are opportunities throughout history. But I want to link it, it's not just the crisis of others, that we look at kind of the crisis, the Syrian crisis, the financial crisis, that we find opportunities, the crisis in shortage of any kind of resources, money, creates inventiveness, creates ideas, creates kind of new new ways we can kind of also be innovative at a high level. Maybe, and we should also welcome the students, which are kind of why we're all here, and that this is also the Sustainable Design Week is tailored to them. And if you don't know in which kind of crisis you are, or you will be, I can tell you now that you're in a crisis, or you're heading towards a crisis if you just think about your future. The market in the Gulf is closing for Lebanese. They're building their own schools, they're having their own schools. Lebanese are not that much liked in these days, and so you won't find the jobs or that many jobs there as in the past 20 years. In Lebanon, also, I mean, you know that the economy is down, and also here, I mean, the jobs are limited, and you can imagine so that you're heading towards a crisis on a personal level. But if you look at the opportunity of this crisis, is that if we look at the profession of architecture in general, if you think that only of the whole built environment worldwide, only 3% of architects are involved, gives us the opportunity on 97% that we can kind of also think of, and this is what's going to happen. And so there is not, we don't have to share the same cake. We can expand the cake enormously, and actually that's what's happening in educational institutions for architecture, is expanding the cake. All universities are popping out like with public interest design programs. We're starting it here slowly, and I think that this is an opportunity for you and this seminar to look at crises, but also considering that you expand the field you're working in, that architecture is moving towards other fields and other terrains, and not just in the luxury or in the traditional field. So we're going to start as this 3-day seminar is like subdivided, different forms of crisis or opportunities. The opportunities first in urban development, which is today with Kilian Kleinschmidt and Melanie Fessel. Tomorrow we look at opportunities in education, in particular this area, this region, and of course the crisis that comes from the Syrian war and the Iraqi war, or the uncertainties in this region, with Noura Jumblat and Hugh Bosley. And on Friday, opportunities in architecture. We are a remaining kind of a architectural department, and therefore architecture is important and design is important to you, because that's the program where Albert company and I will present some work which is related to crisis. First of all, I would like to also to share with you that the detailed bios are in, and the program is in this folder, so you can have it. You can pick it, and then you can also, hopefully, you will attend all the sessions, and I think Kilian was already like introduced, so I'd like to give Kilian the stage for opportunities in urban development.
Thank you very much. I mean, first of all, a disclaimer, I do not work any longer for the Minister of Interior of Austria. I wouldn't, not for this one. Anyway, I will be provoking your thinking. I will provoke a crisis in your brains over the next 25, 30 minutes, because I'm going to bust all the myths about migration, refugees, poor people, and so on. So that's the first crisis you're going to survive, is change your mind, open your brains, change completely the way of how you have been looking at poor people, refugees, and migrants till now. And obviously, this is a country which is at the heart of it. I mean, yes, 10 million of you, those who are Lebanese, 10 million outside of the country, or something like that. There's more Lebanese outside than inside. It's a country which is heavily hit by the crisis next door, and by its own crisis still, and displacement is still a reality. So it's about time to think about all of that differently. Move forward, look into the future, get out of that sort of narrative and the storytelling about displacement you have had since the Second World War, because that's when the whole change of narrative started. Because remember one thing, we are sitting here because we are the babies of refugees, all of us. And we are also the descendants of people who have been pushed out, displaced all over the history. All of us, if we would have returned, we would be sitting in some cave in East Africa, because that's where we're coming from. Remember that. Our origins are somewhere there. So people have moved in history, have moved on, have been displaced. Yes, a lot of injustice done, a lot of bad things happened, but that's how we moved on. That's how evolution took place. That's how progress took place. But that's how change was brought in. Different cultures meeting, clashing, and of course all of this producing innovation, change. That's difficult at times. It rubs, it stings, it smells. It's really something which is not good at times. But again, remember, error is the origin of learning. Every child learns because it falls. It learns to walk because it falls 100 times, 1,000 times, and finally it starts walking. So we're learning by error. We're learning by mistake. We're learning by crisis. So that's very, very important. So let's put all of this into context. There's about 7.5 billion of us on Earth as we speak. We will be around 10 billion in 25, 30 years from now. Let's remember that at this very moment, and we will get back to this, half of us are living in urban centers. There will be another 2 billion coming into urban centers within the next 25 years. We all know that, whether we want it or not, but that's happening. Okay, let's move that a little bit aside. But anyway, so out of the 7.5 billion, roughly 50% are not so well off as we speak. 50% of the world's population are somehow poor, whatever parameters and indicators you use, but 50% of us are poor. There's 800 million today who go hungry, 800 million today. 1.5 billion no electricity, and so on and so forth. And so all of this, in that, we're getting suddenly excited about people on the move. People on the move is something which is shaking us up. We're suddenly talking about this all the time. I mean, I come from Europe. Obviously, in Europe, it's theme number one, migration, refugees, all these things, I mean, suddenly are shaking us up. And guess what? I thank the people who made it to Europe, because they brought a very important message. First of all, guys in Europe, your societies, which you are so proud of, they don't work so well as you have been pretending. You have forgotten about all your social acquisition, all your social systems and structures you have invented after the Second World War when you were displaced, yourselves, homeless, and so on. That's when we had something like social innovation taking place all over Europe on housing, affordable housing, on health insurance, on all these things which had something to do with social, bringing people up again, living again, make them human beings again who actually live like everybody wants to live. And suddenly, because 1.5 million people in 2015, 16, 17 come to us and they say, hey, you have forgotten about affordable housing. You have forgotten about education. You have forgotten about what the 21st century should bring to all people. One thing. Second thing, they brought to us a very clear message on Europe, the Peace Project Europe. You have forgotten it as well. You have forgotten that you built Europe as a peace project. It's the first time in history that there is a generation which is born in peace and will retire in peace. For God's sake, don't forget that, Europeans. It's not about economic expansion, as you have been doing over the last few years. No, it's about a peace project. So that was the second message brought by refugees to us. And the third one, that's the actual theme this evening, is, hey, guys, globalization has taken place. We actually have this. We are connected. We know how you live, and you cannot hide us in some dark corners of the world anymore. Now, anyway, we're coming to you as well to tell you aid doesn't work. Your concepts of charity, invented after the Second World War in this way, don't work any longer. It's not enough to have a human being satisfied with 2,100 kilocalories. Because and I was working for 30 years, if you want, in humanitarian work, running refugee camps, crises, emergencies of all sorts, from earthquakes to wars to floods and so on and so forth. I mean, if you get into my hands as a representative of UNHCR or some of the other aid organizations, that's what you are reduced to. 2,100 kilocalories times maybe 150 people in this room, 18 liters of clean water times 150 people in this room. That's what you are reduced to. I'm not looking at your faces as I do now. I look at figures. I look at statistics. I look at an anonymous crowd of people which has lost their identity besides maybe gender, maybe age. That's what I look at if I look at you and you're becoming a beneficiary of humanitarian programs. So that's what you're reduced to, numbers, faceless numbers, statistics, where I will divide you into those who go to the female toilet, to the male toilet. I divide you by 20 or 25. That gives me the number of toilets I'm going to build. That is the reduction in crisis of human beings. And again, these guys who made it from Turkey, from Lebanon, from Jordan, from Afghanistan, from everywhere to Europe, they were saying, hey, this is not good enough anymore. If you people who have been living for hundreds of years on the back of others, if you think that with your meager, ridiculous charity, you can actually satisfy and hide and pretend that a poor person doesn't need more than survival aid, then forget it. No, we are now going to tell you it's going to work differently. And that's what we're at now. That is what the real challenge is in our new world, is to realize that the concepts of aid, of survival aid, should be and must be part of history. Maybe for those who like figures, do you realize that this world, this rich world, this incredibly wealthy world when it comes to technologies, knowledge, best practice, experiences, money, finance, trillions lying around, is spending a ridiculous $25 billion a year on humanitarian aid. The famous development aid everybody is hiding is, again, European governments very proud, oh yes, we're getting to help. What does it mean? It's a total of maybe 150 billion a year. just realize what that means in global terms, where at any given moment you have 120 million people somehow in distress because of climate change, displacement, because of crisis of any form. 120 million people at any given moment need humanitarian aid. And of course, again, roughly half of the population of the world, they need better access of what the world can do. And you know what the deficit is? The estimated deficit every year is about $2 trillion to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals we have subscribed to. We collectively, as the world, committed to the Sustainable Development Goals. 2 trillion shortfall in money. So 200 billion aid altogether, humanitarian aid and development aid, and 2 trillion shortfall to achieve the basics of what this world actually should deliver to all its citizens, to all its inhabitants, to all human beings. So that means somehow it doesn't work. It's not with 5 euros, dollars, lira, or pounds or something we're going to change it if you donate it to some NGO, to some aid organization. So we need to really look into the true challenges of what this world actually produces. We cannot hide, again, behind cheap little fix-it things, such as the camp I was in charge. So be honest in your brains the moment you hear the word refugees. I mean, here we're in Lebanon, there are no formal big camps, but the moment you think about refugees, you think about poor people, you think about tents, you talk about this type of association. And so that's the association most of the people in the world will have with that term, this desperate migration and displacement. And so just realize that, again, the figures we're talking about are not the true figures. There's about 22 million refugees per se in the world. But there are millions and millions, and they fall under the Refugee Convention, and that's the mandate of the High Commissioner for Refugees and so on. But the true number of people on the move because they cannot actually access their basic human rights, they cannot access, again, the resources of this world, because they have to move or because of climate change taking place, that's about 1 billion people. So there's 1 billion people who are migrating, moving, sort of a mass of people everywhere around. That's the true challenge. Now, does this mean we need to panic, as many of our politicians trying to do right now? The fear, at least when you live in Austria, in Germany, or somewhere, the fear is, my God, all the Africans are going to come to Europe. We're going to be overwhelmed by the wave of Africans who are going to overrun our wealthy societies, which, by the way, they have made to a large extent wealthy. I mean, we have become wealthy because of colonial relationships, but not because of unjust trade. I mean, that continues to be a fact. So, I mean, no change. Post-colonial structures still suck out a lot of resources out of these countries. So the biggest root cause for displacement is our wealth. Let's be clear. So that means now, what is it we need to do? And let's become a bit more positive. Because there's hope, and because there are solutions, because there is actually a different way of looking at things. So let me start with my little example of the refugee camp in Al-Zatari in Jordan, which I was asked to manage back in 2013. I was still with the United Nations, and I came out of an assignment in Mogadishu, which was rather tough. I was asked by the High Commissioner to go to Jordan and to fix the camp. I said, what, in my point of career, why should I go to manage a refugee camp? Are you joking? I was the deputy coordinator for Somalia, deputy envoy to Pakistan, God knows what, and you want me to become a camp manager? He said, no, you will have fun. That place has become completely uncontrollable. And yeah, well, 100,000 Syrian people, 10 kilometers from the Syrian border in Al-Mafraq region and governorate in Jordan, rebelling against the 2,100 kilocalories being sort of the survival. When we were telling them, oh, be happy with 2,100 kilocalories, and be happy because you've got the tent. Be happy because you've got actually communal toilets. You can all go to the toilet together because you're a community. I mean, who likes to go to the toilet together all the time? I mean, it's funny during camping holidays or so, but it's not funny when you have as a perspective to go to communal toilets for the next 100 years. That's what we're basically telling people when they come to a camp, because that's how camps produce. So then we discovered that they were really rebelling against that not being recognized as human beings, as individuals, their right to be human beings. They vandalized the public facilities, stole 86 buildings, including the police station, by the way, vandalized everything up to the last thing. That's how we described it. But the true story was they needed the materials because they were building, actually, their settlement. They were building their homes, their new homes, because they realized al-Bashar is not going to go. And so, well, now we're going to stay here. Like in history, everybody has stayed at some point, somewhere. Very few people ever return. So let's kill that myth of return, which is enshrined in our brains. You know the most beautiful refugee camp on earth? We met there. It's Venice. The city of Venice started by people fleeing from the barbarians, us, the Germans and so on. We were devastating the countryside in mainland Italy. And you know, so they built that safe space in the lagoon. And it actually developed into a city. It developed into a trading empire, into an arts empire, into creativity, into beauty. That is a refugee city. So I'm not saying that Zaatari felt like Venice yet, but it felt like people actually taking things into their own hands, beginning to design things, beginning to actually despise aid which was not corresponding to the people. 3,000 shops established. Monthly turnover is one of the fastest growing souks in the whole Middle East. 15 million euros monthly turnover in the 3,000 shops. That was business. Yes, stealing the electricity or privatizing the electricity, the spaghetti wiring everybody knows very well in this region. That is part of the whole thing, but they made that to their Venice. They told us, you guys got it all wrong. So that was the moment when we started thinking about all of that in a different way. We said, true, let's stop talking about that return myth. Doesn't matter whether a city we're building it for 20 years, 1,000 years, forever. But let people live and begin to live as they should be. Strong, resilient communities and people building when people feel safe, when they feel confident, when they feel that they can actually thrive and develop, have perspectives and looking forward. So then we brought in, because we, as United Nations and NGOs, had no clue about urban planning. So we brought in the City of Amsterdam and the Association of Dutch Municipalities as a partner. They're actually coming to, and I think they're striking a deal here in Lebanon as well for cooperation with a number of municipalities. So we brought them in to work with the northern municipalities in Jordan to actually help the municipalities to deal with the impact of more people. Demographic change is a fact. Don't hide it. If you have more people, they need more water, then they produce more sewage, they need more housing, and so on and so forth. Services and infrastructure to be adapted. And in the same time, accept that 100,000 Syrians in the camp of al-Zaatari actually building a city. So in that case, have Amsterdam as a partner to develop that space into a sustainable space, moving away from short term thinking in terms of water grids, sewage grids, and so on, which, by the way, and I know it's a touchy issue here as well, which is one of the big issues in the Palestinian settlements, because most of these settlements have risen basically out of tent cities and were never designed to become actually an urban area, which they have become in most of the countries in the region. Whether you want it or not, but it's a fact. So they're unsustainable because they have never been designed and they're structured as a city. So that is one of the most important parts, to remember that, in fact, even if you start as a storage facility for people, which you have to do in crisis, it's clear when you have an earthquake, something happening, it's tense, it stings in the first response, but shift your gear and think, well, it's going to be a win for everyone if I'm going to invest in the future and investing in perspectives. Investing in something which is actually going to transform into productivity. Again, keep Venice in mind. Keep in mind that most of our cities have come out of displacement, including here, including everywhere in the world. It's come out of migration and refugees. It's safe places around the temple, the church, the castle. So simply changing in our minds that idea that a good refugee is a returning refugee is very, very important, because that is actually, again, an invention of post-Second World War politics, when we had, again, this driven by European agenda. The Refugee Convention was driven by a European agenda, including the line, voluntary return to the place of origin is the most preferred option and solution. And that is actually blocking all of us. And it's blocking us from developing and actually preventing our own communities to thrive. So now, where does this lead us? Really in the broader terms. Again, realizing lots of people are on the move. Lots of people on the move in the world. Yes. Today, since this morning, 170,000 people moved into a city somewhere in the world. Rural, urban movements. 5 million every month. 2 billion in the next few years, in the next 25 years. That is the real challenge. The mayor of Lagos, who is going to experience another 20 million people over the next 15 years, he has a problem. The mayor of New Delhi, I saw somewhere a projection that by the end of the century they're expecting in the Delhi area 400 million people to live. Just imagine. I mean, these are the challenges of our world. Massive, rapid transformation of society. People on the move, regardless, again, whether it's a war, whether it's the climate change, whether it's poverty, whether it's simply, and you're going to hear about more digital development tomorrow from you, but want to be part of a modern world. It's not good enough, again, to tell a poor person, be happy with a well in your village. No, they also want to be part of an interesting life. More and more of us want to be part of that modern world. Again, whether it's good or it's bad, I'm not judging, but that's a fact. So what we are proposing, and that's the real the way forward, is to accept that this transformation is taking place, that we move away from that focus on the refugee dimension. And maybe before I go to the real proposal, let me talk about Bangladesh as an example. Bangladesh, we're getting very excited because there is 1 million displaced people, refugees from Myanmar. Terrible what is happening in Myanmar. It's a genocide. Say it. Yes, it's a genocide. It's systematic persecution of a particular people who are then declared basically stateless. They end up in Bangladesh. What is happening in Bangladesh? It's the usual aid machine has started rolling. Everybody focuses on 1 million people. So, very good. Again, I have my issues on the delivery forms. You're giving charity, you're dishing out things people don't want, they have to sell them, somebody buys and sells them. So it's a constant trading of aid goods. The usual international NGOs and organizations showing up, getting a lot of money, the local organizations getting no money. I mean, 4%, by the way, only going to local organizations. So we can have a big discussion on the delivery mechanism for refugees in Bangladesh currently, where nobody has learned anything. However, let's remember that the real Bangladeshi issue is not 1 million Rohingya refugees. The real Bangladeshi issue is 25 to 30 million people who will have to move from the coastal region because of climate change and because of rising sea level. So what is Bangladesh going to do? Waiting and sitting that Dhaka is going to grow into an unmanageable monster of increasingly radicalizing people who will be clashing, and we will have actually a real emergency in Bangladesh because the country is going to explode? Or, and then we're coming to the real way forward, are we going to be proactive and going to be able to design spaces where people can live and work in dignity? Of course, what is the right model? We just had Paul Romer getting a Nobel Prize a couple of days ago for his work, and that includes charter cities as a way forward. Now there's lots of space for interpretation of what charter cities should look like, but basically saying, let us begin to create new spaces for people with, why not, basically a lab for better governance, for better ways of engaging, better protection of workers, basically create spaces where millions of people can live and work. That displacement, that migration, desperate migration, is actually being fended off and basically absorbed by new spaces instead of sitting passively and waiting that people come, and then sitting and not knowing what to do. So last year, for instance, with my team, we have been working on the issue again of Africa, the response to Africa. We were asked by the Chancellor of Austria to come up with a response to the increasingly nationalistic, populistic, simplistic ideas of building up fences and sending warships on the Mediterranean and basically shutting off. And that's what we said. Well, Africa, if you can generalize Africa, which you shouldn't, we should not. It's a lot of countries, it's different people, different levels of things happening. We should be looking at Africa as a continent of opportunity. Our title, by the way, of the study we did and the recommendations and the strategy was Africa from Crisis to Opportunity, kind of linking up to the theme of this workshop, of this conference. So Africa from crisis to opportunity, looking into, yeah, well, yes, there's 40,000 people moving into cities in Africa every day. There is a rapid change of population taking place. Yes, there's certain areas which are not livable anymore, others there are. So why don't we put all the brain power we have, and there's a lot of brain power sitting in this room, and future brain power, if I can say, is to use our capacities we have to bring that all together in a partnership and saying, how do we develop new spaces which actually function, which provide the governance which is the right form and, of course, adapted to the various environments. That's what we're currently going to pilot in Ethiopia. We're going to pilot that eventually and hopefully in Libya, which doesn't have as such a nation state, but has a lot of issues with displacement, a lot of people on the move, a lot of tensions. And there we're going to offer and going to work together, and that's driven by Libyans, not by external people, saying, help us to actually develop new spaces. We call them sustainable development zones. We call that basically a different form of the Roma charter cities. It means getting it out completely out of the humanitarian, the development agenda, moving it much more into, and that's of course quite often criticized, into a line of investing in new spaces, investing in new cities. It's an opportunity for capital to actually finally get there where it should be, is to develop these new living spaces for millions of people. I know it's controversial, but I like to refer to it. I mean, look into Hong Kong, look into Shenzhen. I mean, the way of how the Chinese have been dealing with lifting people out of poverty. Yeah, well, rapid urbanization, we can criticize that, but 700 million people got out of poverty. 700 million people. Look into, not far from here, obviously, what happened in the Emirates. With all the criticism on labor rights, with all the criticism on governance, but there are 7 million migrants living there. 7 million people who came from outside, half of them from crisis regions. So for me, the Emirates, in a way, do more than any other region in the world on refugees. And they are actually sending money back home into poor regions. Remittances, obviously, we all know, and Lebanon is one of the big beneficiaries of remittances. Remittances are 5 times the amount of development aid. It's about 1 trillion a year, at least. So that means investing in such spaces, improving on learning the lessons of what these spaces have and these entities have taught us, such as, again, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Emirates, the Shenzhens, I mean, the different models in China you would find, and so on. And let's move that decisively forward. Let's move away from that little thinking of 2,100 kilocalories storage facilities for people on the move. Let's move that into a dimension of thriving communities. And that's what I really would like to give you as my message. We can do it. So migration is actually, I think, an opportunity for positive change. And actually, if we manage and accept it, not as a bad thing, but a good thing, understanding that I would call it happy migration is what we should be aiming for, not desperate migration. The more people we actually get to be able to migrate, the better. We're going to talk again about education, that's part of that. Everybody to have a good passport like mine, that would be the aim. Not needing a passport anymore at some point because everybody can move where the opportunities are. That should be the hope. So with that, I thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.